All right, ready for a story about ambition, deception, and, well, a whole lot of accounting tricks.
Oh, yeah.
We're going deep into the WorldCom scandal, the one back in 2002. And you might be surprised just how much a CEO's lavish spending played into the whole downfall of this telecom giant.
It's quite a story.
Yeah, we've got this academic paper here that really digs into all the financial and organizational mess that came after.
Yeah, it really breaks down how a company's culture can sort of enable something like this. Such a massive fraud. It's a cautionary tale, really.
Yeah. So just to set the stage, WorldCom started pretty small, right?
Oh, yeah. Way back in 1983, they were just this tiny carrier down in Mississippi.
Okay.
But then through the 90s, they just went on this crazy acquisition spree.
Wow.
Just snapping up all these other telecom companies left and right.
Oh, wow.
And their stock price, it was soaring, which of course fueled even more acquisitions, classic bubble era kind of story.
Yeah. But this rapid growth, I mean, was it all actually built on something solid?
That's the thing. When the dot-com bubble burst in 2001, the demand for telecom services, it just tanked.
Oh, right.
And all of a sudden, these risky investments, all that fiber optic infrastructure they'd put in, it didn't look so great.
Yeah.
So they were up against a real challenge: how to keep up this appearance of double-digit growth, the kind they'd promised all the investors,
Right.
when in reality their performance was going down.
So that's where the accounting, the magic tricks come in, the maneuvers to sort of mask their real financial situation. What were some of the things they did?
Well, one thing was they messed with their accrual estimates. Think of it like when you estimate your utility bills every month.
Okay.
You budget a certain amount, right? But then the actual cost can be different.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, WorldCom, they played with these estimates, made their line costs, which are the fees they paid other companies to use their networks. They made them look way lower than they really were.
So they were artificially boosting their profits, at least on paper.
Exactly.
What else did they do?
They also started capitalizing their line costs improperly, of course.
Okay.
So normally, operating expenses, those line costs, you deduct those from revenue in the same period.
Right.
But WorldCom, they started treating these expenses like capital expenditures.
Like
long-term assets.
Oh, okay.
This let them spread those costs out over several years.
Clever. But definitely not ethical.
Right.
So basically hiding expenses to make their earnings look bigger.
Yeah.
How did this go unnoticed for so long? I mean, was everybody at WorldCom involved?
Well, the paper, it points to this, what they call a toxic triangle.
Okay.
3 factors: destructive leadership, susceptible followers, and then a conducive environment.
Let's break those down one by one, starting with the leadership. Who was actually running this ship? What was their role in all this?
Okay, so you have Bernie Ebbers, the CEO.
Mm-hmm.
He was known for his autocratic style.
Mm-hmm.
He was very invested in the company's success. I mean, literally. He'd taken out these huge loans, and he used WorldCom stock as collateral.
Oh, wow.
So as the stock price started, wobbling a bit, he felt a ton of pressure to make sure it didn't, completely tank.
So his personal finances were tied directly to how the company was doing.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big conflict of interest.
Definitely.
What about this susceptible followers part of the triangle?
Right. Well, WorldCom, they had this culture of fear, of silence. Anyone who, maybe raised a question about the accounting practices, they were ignored or even, intimidated.
Wow.
Like, don't rock the boat, even when it's pretty clear the boat's, taking on water.
And what about this conducive environment? Was it just a matter of everybody looking the other way?
Well, it was more than that. This paper really digs into the role of Wall Street analysts, especially the ones at Salmon Smith Barney.
Okay.
They had a lot of influence on how investors saw the company.
Right.
And they were pushing this really rosy view of WorldCom, even when, there were warning signs.
And why would they do that?
Well, they were making a lot of money from investment banking deals with WorldCom.
So their best interest was in keeping that stock price up.
Exactly. Even if it meant, not really looking at the reality of the situation.
So you have this perfect storm brewing, a CEO who's personally tied to the stock price,
Right.
employees who are afraid to speak up, and then analysts who are more concerned with profits than with, being accurate. It seems like it was only a matter of time before it blew up.
It was, and it did. But before we get to the downfall, there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to talk about. So remember Cynthia Cooper, the VP of Internal Audit?
Yeah, yeah.
She's the one who really blew the whistle on the whole thing.
Wow. It takes a lot of guts to stand up to that kind of pressure,
Yeah.
especially with the culture that you've described. What did she actually find?
Well, she and her team, they were working like crazy hours, digging through mountains of paperwork.
Oh.
And they found something pretty shocking. WorldCom had been capitalizing like billions of dollars in line costs that should have been, expensed right away.
And so that created this massive gap between what they were reporting and their actual performance.
Exactly.
So the house of cards began to crumble. What happened when she brought this to light?
Well, when she presented her findings to the board, it sent shockwaves through the company and eventually through the whole financial world, really.
Yeah.
The stock price, it just plummeted, just wiped out billions of dollars in shareholder value. I mean, it was devastating for anyone who had, put their savings in WorldCom.
Wow. Talk about a rude awakening for those investors. Did WorldCom try to recover from this? I mean, from such a huge hit to their reputation.
They did. They tried to rebuild. They rebranded themselves as MCI. It was a long, tough process.
Where do you even start to pick up the pieces after something like that?
Well, they knew they needed a fresh start, had to break away from that toxic culture that, had let this whole thing happen. So one of the first things was they brought in new leadership. Michael Capellas took over as CEO. He had this reputation for integrity, for transparency.
So a complete opposite of Eber's style. Did Capellas make any big changes to the way things ran?
He did. He brought in a whole new team, and he restructured the board of directors.
Yeah.
Their focus was really clear, transparency and ethical business practices. They had to rebuild trust, from the ground up.
That's a pretty tall order. What specific steps did they take to try to restore that trust?
Well, they implemented this zero tolerance policy, made it very clear that, unethical behavior just wouldn't be tolerated.
Okay.
They also created a code of ethics outlining the company's values and what they expected, in terms of ethical conduct.
A code of ethics is a good start.
Mm-hmm.
But, actions speak louder than words. Did they put anything in place to actually make sure those changes weren't just, empty promises?
They did. They went so far as to create a whole corporate ethics office.
Wow.
To oversee, the implementation and enforcement of all these new standards. It showed that they were serious about change internally, to their employees, but also externally to investors and the public.
So new leadership, a new code of ethics, a whole office dedicated to ethics. Seems like they threw the whole book at the problem. Did it work? Did they actually get any of that trust back?
It's tough to say for sure. I mean, these efforts, along with broader reforms like Sarbanes-Oxley, did help to restore some trust, but the damage was done.
Yeah. Sarbanes-Oxley, that was a direct response to WorldCom and Enron, right?
Yeah, it was.
Can you remind us what that actually changed?
Sure. It was this landmark piece of legislation, really brought about huge reforms in corporate governance, financial reporting, introduced stricter rules for reporting, more oversight of auditors, and tougher penalties for fraud.
Okay.
It was all about, making companies more accountable, trying to prevent these kinds of scandals from happening again.
It's amazing how one scandal can lead to such widespread change.
Yeah.
Do you think these reforms were effective in preventing future misconduct?
I think Sarbanes-Oxley and the other reforms, they've definitely made it harder for companies to get away with blatant accounting fraud.
Right.
But, no system is perfect. Human greed, the temptation to cut corners, those are always going to be there. And where there's a will, there's often a way to find loopholes or exploit weaknesses.
So the rules of the game might have changed, but the players haven't? We've seen other big corporate scandals since WorldCom.
Right. We had cases like Wirecard in Germany. It had a lot of similarities to WorldCom. It shows that even with stricter rules, corporate fraud is still a real threat.
So what's the takeaway here? Are we just stuck in this cycle of corporate greed and financial collapse?
I wouldn't say doomed, but we definitely need to stay vigilant. The WorldCom scandal, it shows how important it is to have a multifaceted approach to fighting corporate fraud. We need strong regulations, good internal controls within companies, and independent audits.
Okay.
But maybe most importantly, we need a culture shift.
What do you mean by by a culture shift?
It's about, promoting ethical leadership and accountability at every level of a company. Leaders need to set the tone, show that they're truly committed to ethical behavior, not just, talking about it.
Yeah.
And just as important, we need to empower employees to speak up if they see something wrong.
Like Cynthia Cooper did. She's a great example of how one person can make a difference.
Absolutely. Her courage is inspiring. But to create a culture where whistleblowers feel safe coming forward, we need more than just individual bravery.
So what else needs to be there to protect those who do speak out?
Companies need to have strong whistleblower protection programs, and these programs need to be more than just, words on paper. They have to be enforced, make sure people who report wrongdoing don't face retaliation.
It sounds like preventing these kinds of scandals takes a real collective effort.
It does.
We need strong regulations, ethical leadership, empowered employees, good oversight mechanisms. But there's one really important part we haven't talked about yet, the human cost of these scandals.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, the legal stuff, the regulatory changes, but we can't forget about the real people whose lives are affected by all of this.
When we talk about the human cost of a scandal like this, like WorldCom, what are we really talking about?
We're talking about the thousands of employees, who lost their jobs. Right.
Like retirement savings, their sense of security. I mean,
Yeah.
so many of these folks, they were dedicated, they worked hard, they had nothing to do with the fraud.
Right.
They were just caught in the middle of it all.
It's a good reminder that these scandals aren't just, these abstract financial things. They have real consequences for people.
Absolutely. Think about it. The feeling of betrayal,
Yeah.
working for a company you believed in,
Yeah.
and then seeing it all fall apart because of what a few people at the top did.
Right.
And it wasn't just employees, investors, a lot of them just ordinary folks saving for retirement or their kids' education.
Mm.
They saw their savings disappear.
That's just devastating. Financially, emotionally. I mean, beyond the money, what about, the psychological impact on the people involved?
Yeah, the paper actually talks about that, the emotional fallout.
Okay.
A lot of former WorldCom employees, they felt ashamed, angry, betrayed.
Some even struggled with, depression and anxiety afterwards.
I can only imagine. I mean, their lives were turned upside down. The trust was broken. Their financial futures were uncertain. It's just a stark reminder of how corporate greed can have these ripple effects that reach so far.
Exactly. It's a lesson we have to remember.
Yeah,
It shows how important it is to have a system where transparency, accountability, ethical conduct are priorities.
Mm.
We've talked about regulations, about corporate culture, whistleblowing. What else can we do to try to prevent this from happening again?
It seems like education is a big part of it. I mean, can we do a better job of educating investors, employees about, the warning signs, how to spot potential fraud?
I think so. Financial literacy programs can really help, give people the knowledge and the tools to make good investment decisions and to recognize those red flags even within their own companies.
That's a great point. We need to give people the power to be more discerning, to ask the tough questions,
Yeah.
to hold companies and leaders accountable.
Yeah. And in the end, I think to prevent future WorldComs, we need to change how we think about success in business. We need to move away from this focus on just short-term profits and embrace a more sustainable ethical approach, one that thinks about everyone involved. The employees, the investors, the community.
That's a powerful message. The WorldCom scandal, it really shows us just how bad things can get when greed and ethical lapses go unchecked. But it also offers some hope. It shows how important individual courage is, speaking truth to power, and the fact that we can make meaningful change.
It does, and it's a story that still matters today. It pushes us to learn from the past and to work towards a more ethical, responsible future.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the WorldCom scandal, we'll leave you with this thought. How can we each play a role in creating a corporate world where ethics and integrity are more than just words, but the very foundation of success?
That's a good question, and it's one that we all need to think about.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and something to really think about. Until next time, keep learning, keep asking those questions, and keep pushing for a more ethical and accountable business world.